My name is Madeline Hoffman, everyone. Welcome to, I think this is our 4th monthly vigil, usually on the first Saturday of the month. First time was on the second Saturday of the month because of weather concerns. And today we have the best weather of all, believe it or not, even though it's still not exactly springtime. I'm the director of New Jersey Peace Action, one of the groups that's part of the New Jersey Anti-War Agenda. And today's vigil and rally was organized to coincide with the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King, April 4th, 1968. And a year prior to that, the anniversary of Dr. King's speech Beyond Vietnam, which he delivered not too far from here at Riverside Church in New York City. We didn't have it exactly on the day of the anniversary because People's Organization for Progress held quite an event on that day. They have an annual event which they've been conducting for many years. So many of us participated in their rally and march on April 4th. There probably were 100 or so people here that day. So ours is a few days later. But what we decided to do today is first to have a series of presentations, short ones, on the state of the war and the state of the peace in the United States and abroad. And our first speaker, because they're on a caravan, right? A fundraising caravan right now, will be, and I can't keep the wind from blowing my list here, will be Jessa Bonifay, and she'll be speaking about what's happening in the Philippines. Let's welcome Jessa.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hello. Again, my name is Jessa Bonifay. I am the chairperson for Anak Bayan, New Jersey. First, I want to thank all the organizers for having us. I'm excited to be here and to build with all of y'all. So, I'm here to talk about the Philippines and what the media doesn't tell you. The Philippines has become a site of inter-imperialist struggle. First, we have China, who continues aggression in the West Philippine Sea to become a bigger imperialist power. Next, we have the US, who maintains its hold on the Philippines. Our country has been a testing ground for operations. Now, there is an Operation Pacific Eagle, which will heighten the militarization within the country, with spending similar to what occurred in Iraq and Afghanistan in the War on Terror. President Trump has even called the Philippines the most prime piece of real estate from the military standpoint. Let us also not forget how President Duterte is a puppet of the U.S. 14,000 extrajudicial killings have happened in only a year and a half of President Rodrigo Duterte's so-called war on drugs, many of whom are poor and innocent Filipinos. 400,000 forced evacuations in the region of Mindanao from Duterte's martial law. Many are indigenous communities who have been stripped of their ancestral land for corporations to take advantage of. These numbers will only continue to rise from the countless human rights violations if we do not put a stop to this. Let us also not forget the activists who've been labeled as terrorists in rising against this fascist dictatorship. However, we know who the true terrorists are. The number one terrorist is the U.S. They are the ones destabilizing countries for profit and power. They are the same ones who are killing our brown and black siblings on our streets. They are the same ones who will not end gun violence in our schools and communities. The attack on the people has gone on for too long. We must take a stand. We must shed light on these horrific acts. We must oust the U.S. Duterte regime. We must demand a just and lasting peace. So please join us for Stop the Killing speaking tour from April 24th to the 27th to put an end to the U.S. government funding Duterte's repression of the people. Stop the U.S. war machine and other imperialist wars. Thank you.
I'm not asking for much, but I'm going to go around with a hat. And if you don't, it's a fine. But if you got $1 or $2, this is for the Caravan Fund, which is raising awareness of the killing that's going on, and basically it's a Stop the Killing peace caravan for the Filipinos. What are the dates again? The 24th through the 27th. That's when it's coming through New Jersey? Of April. All right. So I'm going to go around with a hat, or I'll pass the hat so you don't have to look me in the eye, but all right?
Okay, all right. Let's hear it once more for Jessa Bonifay and the work that's being done to try to stop yet another misadventure, imperialist adventure, call it what you will, but what it's doing is repressing, suppressing, and killing people, innocent civilians. And so I'm going to speak for just a couple of minutes about the other areas of the world where New Jersey Peace Action has been that New Jersey Peace Action has been concerned about. We've spoken about it here. So the last 3 months: North Korea, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran. I think maybe I might have left somebody out, but that's still a lot right there. And we're going to have Diane Moxley speak about what's happening in Gaza today. So I didn't leave that out. I was leaving that to somebody else to speak on. The situation in North Korea, after the Olympics were over and after the truce was lifted, the United States and South Korea are back to conducting military exercises, military drills. There will be some kind of a summit on the 27th of April between South Korea and North Korea, Maureen? Between South Korea and North Korea, because as you probably know, the president of South Korea has taken the initiative to talk to people from North Korea ever since the Olympics, when the South Koreans and North Koreans marched under the same flag. So there's an attempt at unity and diplomacy being led more so by South Korea than by our own country. Donald Trump has said he's going to meet with Kim Jong-un. We will have to see if that ever happens, and we'll have to see how that proceeds. But we're still in a state of heightened alert about the possibility of there being a war with North Korea. And of course, we all know that could be catastrophic due to the fact... Oh, I just pulled out my plug.
I think you're okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Due to the fact that nuclear weapons are involved. And Jessa mentioned China. Well, we have in that part of the world with North Korea, also China, Russia, other countries with nuclear weapons. And so we just want to roll back the tension and not increase it. So this is strange. It's fading in and out.
Huh. Maybe it is loose.
Hello. You mess with this sometimes.
Okay. All right. You can hear me now? That's better. All right. So North Korea is still an issue. Yemen. We had a vote in the U.S. Senate last week, I believe, or the week before, to attempt to put a curb on United States support for Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's violence and aggression in Yemen. We know that 8 million people in Yemen are on the brink of famine. We know that the port city of Hodeidah is under blockade, so that's increasing the likelihood of more people dying from famine because supplies are being barred from entry. We had this vote, and we had one good thing happen from New Jersey and one not good thing happen. Senator Cory Booker voted for it to consider to consider stopping U.S. support for Saudi Arabia, material and military support, and Senator Menendez voted against doing such a thing. And overall, the Senate voted against doing it as well. So we're in a situation where the march to war in Yemen, or the support for the war in Yemen, continues, although we think there might be some things going on in the next month or so. It's really incumbent on us to continue to raise the issue of why the United States continues to support such violence against, and primarily violence against civilians in Yemen. And in Syria, I don't know what we're going to do. Donald Trump says we're removing the troops from Syria, and then he says we're not. When he says we are, the media go crazy. No, we're not. We can't. But so the bloodshed in Syria continues, and the United States, for my money, and New Jersey Peace Action's money, the United States must withdraw from Syria as well, so that the violence there can subside and the people of Syria can get about the business of taking care of their own lives and making their own decisions. All right, so I think that's in just brief where we are with those particular issues and situations around the world. And so Diane, I'd like to introduce Diane Moxley from the Green Party to talk about the situation in Palestine and Gaza. Diane was in Gaza a few months ago. Well, in Palestine and the West Bank a few months ago. Diane.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Yep, okay. So today I'm going to talk about what's going on in Gaza right now. Unfortunately, our mainstream media is pretty limited in the coverage of the violent reaction of the Israeli military against peaceful protesters over there. So what's happening is starting on March 30th, part of what's called the action of the Great March of Return, which is also referred to as Land Day. This is something that's going to continue till May 15th, which is the anniversary date of the Nakba anniversary, which marks 70 years since 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their villages by the Israeli military back in 1948. Part of this action has makeshift tents put up about a half a mile from the Israeli blockade fencing. And these tents are supposed to symbolize the right of return for all Palestinian refugees. And at this time, Gaza is kept under siege. It is essentially the world's largest prison, as it is fenced in and blockaded from all sides. The ports are blocked, and actually they're shut down, they're closed. So from the blockade land barriers, from the port closures, we have all sorts of supplies are blocked. So we're talking about even minimal basic necessities, food, medical supplies, construction materials, things for basic human survival are blocked. And so in this state, and for this anniversary, which has been 70 years now, these days of action that began on March 30th were met with horrific violence. On Friday, March 30th, we had at least 16 killed. There has been hundreds shot with live ammunition. We have over 1,000 injured from that day alone from other less than lethal crowd control devices, or unfortunately, the phrase that they like to use, which sometimes does become lethal. And the protests have continued. Yesterday was a little bit more intense, again, as the Friday before, and there were at least 8 killed, but these are early reports. We even had one person that was a member of press who was clearly, he had a press labeled vest on and was shot, and unfortunately he has passed away. As of today's date, the reports are 29 have been killed. And leading up to these scheduled protests, we have had ominous statements made by the Israeli authorities in which they stated that they were going to use live ammunition and take any means necessary to protect this fencing. Individuals were killed or seriously wounded. Well, actually, at this point, there's been some very sparse and undocumented allegations of, I believe, maybe 2 armed protesters, but there's nothing that has been presented to show this as being fact. So we have unarmed protesters who appear to show no serious threat to the military that are protecting this fencing. And basically there is every indication at this time that security forces are using excessive force. So what I'm asking for is that we demand the call by the UN Secretary General for an independent and transparent investigation into these incidents, with a view to holding those accountable responsible. And why? Because the U.S. government gives $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel every year. I'm also asking that everybody get involved in the boycott, divest, sanction movement. And also, right now, it started in about November of last year, we have H.R. 4391. This is legislation that is seeking to block our military aid from being used in the unlawful detention of Palestinian youth who are horrifically interrogated by use of violence. So I'm asking it for those calls, and of course we're asking for a call to the end of violence against unarmed, non-violent protesters. Thank you.
There's a similarity in these stories, isn't there? There's a similarity in terms of who's conducting the violence and who's suffering, isn't there? And when we held when we participated in the event on Wednesday, we talked a lot also about violence here at home, and the violence of poverty, the violence of the police against unarmed black men. There have been another rash of such events in the last number of days where unarmed African American men have been shot in the back 6 times out of 8. So we're talking about a need to end violence both at home and abroad. And one of the things that Dr. King said in his speech, which we'll be reading in just a little while, is, "I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed without having first spoken clearly about the greatest surveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent." This was written in 1967. Has anything changed? No, I think we're still the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Okay, our next speaker, who's going to, is Bahman Azad, who's going to talk about national actions and perhaps international actions taking place next Sunday, April 15th, to end the wars at home and abroad.
Thank you, Madeline. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present to you some of the aspects of the works we are doing. I am the coordinator of the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases and also organizational secretary of the U.S. Peace Council. For a long time, if you look at it, for half a century since this famous speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, the situation in our world is much worse than it was when he was speaking. At that time, we had only the Vietnam War. Now we have dozens of them, and all of them much more brutal and destructive. So we have not advanced an inch in terms of solving the problems that Dr. King was talking about. Based on his profound statement that every bomb we drop when another country lands on our own cities, we believe that we should bring all of the movements together, not just the peace movement, but the struggle for peace, for civil rights, support for immigrants, all of those, because we believe, as some of the speakers mentioned, it is the imperialist drive that is causing all of those. All the monies are going to wars, not to the people, to the educational process, nothing. That's why at the Peace Council and a few other organizations, we decided that it's time to try to bring all the forces together against the whole situation and what we recognize as U.S. imperialism. So that began the process of forming this coalition, broad coalition of forces that in fact never worked with each other before. And the culmination of it was the conference that we had in Baltimore in January. 200 plus people participated from many organizations. We already have about 300 organizations in the US, and several thousand people have signed on as members and supporters. At that conference, we came up, all of us, with a unanimous resolution to call for a spring day of action in 2018, which was supposed to be broaden even the question of bases into all of the aspects of the problem and the struggles that we are doing. So this resolution was the foundation of the call for April 14 and 15 nationwide days of action, which are now being organized in 6 different major cities in the United States, including New York City, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Bay Area, and Minnesota. And those who cannot travel to those cities are organizing so many local actions for those 2 days. We are asking you, all of you, to be with us on April 15th in Manhattan, Herald Square Park, 34th Street, and I think 6th Avenue, near Macy's. And we are going to be having about an hour and a half, at 2 p.m., an hour and a half of speeches and rally, and then we're going to march to Trump Tower. So that is the plan, and we want all of you to be part of it and have your organization organized for it. We need good mobilization for what we are doing. But at the same time, our work is not stopping at that event. The people who are on the conference calls, weekly conference calls and meetings for organizing the events, decided that we want to maintain this broad coalition as an ongoing coalition of all forces to continue on with the resistance and the struggle to stop the war at home and abroad. At home and abroad. So we will be most probably having monthly conference calls scheduled for everybody to participate in, to coordinate our work, to plan our future work, and develop a strategy of how to resist what is going on and fight against it. So I will ask you to please join us. If you haven't signed on to our coalition's unity statement, do it as a person or have your organization sign on as an organizational endorser. We are trying to even internationalize the struggle. We are forming an international coalition against U.S. NATO bases. Most probably it will soon have, we are scheduling an international conference in Europe, most probably in Ireland, in November. We will announce the details of it, and we encourage you to even go with us to Ireland to fight against NATO as well as the United States, which is the armed wing of the United States, in fact. they call it, member organizations are all part of it, but everybody is following what the United States strategy is, and they're silent about anything that the U.S. does. So that's a U.S. organization, and we want to oppose that too, globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bahman. And if you want to go on the 15th, I'm sure we can arrange for a contingent to go under the New Jersey Peace Action banner, or the POP banner, or a New Jersey banner, or a Veterans for Peace banner. However we want to do it, or all three. So just let me know. Let us know if you want to go in, and we will work something out for that. We have 3 more speakers, I think 3 or 4 more speakers before we get to the readings. So just bear with us. Next speaker is Sharon Hand from People's Organization for Progress. And the Popcorn Kids, who are going to be 6 of our readers when we get to the speech. So take it away, Sharon.
Power to the people.
Power
to the people.
Power to the people.
We have got to begin to raise our voices. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Popcorn Kids, children across the United States and abroad. My first concern has to be the children here, because we're running a school to prison pipeline system in America. America will never repent because it's never acknowledged the brutal attacks on black people throughout the years. Dr. King spoke in one of his speeches, and he said we have to inject morality into this country. That has not been done. Until we do that, nothing will change, because everyone follows America and their tactics. We have to stop and represent our children. We have to make sure that they're safe. We cannot hide behind closed doors and jobs and say we can't do anything. We can do a lot. We have to stop following America's policies and foolishness. July 4th, Thanksgiving, Christmas. We have to change the way we do things. America only understands money. That's why they go to different countries and steal the resources. We have got to stop them by stopping ourselves through technology and everything that they put before us. Give your children a book to read. Stop allowing them to go through all this technology and ask for people to serve them. Our children need jobs. When we don't have any summer programs, we have crime. And it's a reason to kill our children. Unarmed, thinking that they're armed, whatever the situation may be. It's just a reason to shoot them down in the streets. And right now, the focus is on black lives. The reason being, because history. Black people began to stand up and fight. They put their children out there first because they felt like they couldn't lose their jobs. But that didn't stop America from destroying them. That didn't stop America from the water hose. That didn't stop America from the dogs. And today it doesn't stop America from the guns. So I stand here on behalf of the children in the United States, mainly the African American children, because we're the race that has to explain to our children why they are black. No other race is doing that. But the African American race has always had to explain why they are black. We are black because God made us black. So our children are never going to change the color of their skin. Even though we have a lot of mixed races going on today, we need to understand why that's happening, to make the black man extinct. So we have to focus on our children, we have to focus on the growth of America, and we have to grow there in a positive way. And that will never, ever happen until we all get involved. This is a human rights fight that has always been a fight for human rights. We must stand up. We must represent the children. The children are our future. Let's let them take the lead and guide us. Let's make sure they understand their history. And I'd ask everyone to refer to Agenda 21. Take a look at that. It's the reduction of world population by 2030. This memo was put out 450 pages by President Bush. So the system is working across the world. So let's pay attention and let's unite together. Not as one organization, but a group of everyone, human beings that demand respect, that demand the right to live, because because it is a God-given right to the resources of this land. God didn't create us and say, figure it out. He created us and gave us water. And now we let man-made laws take control of water. It's time to stop. Power to the people, and we represent the children, the popcorn kids. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Sharon, and it's the children all over the world who are suffering in Yemen, in Syria, in wherever the United States is at war, in the Philippines, in Honduras, wherever they are. So all children should be valued equally, and all children should be respected and protected, and parents shouldn't feel anywhere in the world that they can't protect their children from the violence that's going on in their country. Speaking of such violence that it's hard to protect against, our next speaker is Terry Fitzgibbons. He's going to speak about drone warfare, one of those extra-constitutional types of war that are affecting people all over the world.
That's fine. My name is Terry Fitzgibbons, and I'm a resident and teacher here in Newark, a member of the People's Organization for Progress, and a member of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 21, here in North Jersey. Thank you to Madeline and Bob. Just wanted to give a quick minute, an update from across the river in Pennsylvania. So last Saturday I was home for the Easter weekend, and the Brandywine Peace Center, a very active peace organization in Philadelphia and in suburban Philadelphia, they held their rally and liturgy against drones outside the Horsham Willow Grove Air Base, which is in Montgomery County, north of Philadelphia, which is one of 12 drone command centers in the United States. So from that base, there are operators, there are pilots, all remote control, of course, intel support people who fly MQ-9 Reaper drones and strikes, of course, in Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, and I'm probably missing a couple other countries. But it is a recently, in the past 4 years, became a drone command center when the Navy and Air Force left. And Brandywine Peace Community has done a fantastic job over the years. They've been at it for the past 45 years and protesting drones for a long time now, especially under the Obama administration. We forgot, many of us forget that 542 drone strikes were carried underneath the Obama administration, many more times than underneath George W. Bush. And just from across the river back home, the Philly suburbs are my home, and the first, as we were getting set up outside the Horsham drone base, there was a little more revving of truck engines, people shouting from their windows, build the wall, people shouting from their windows, Trump support, many more middle fingers that I've been used to since coming to rallies here in Newark. But over time, in the next 2 hours there, what I was really heartened by was the amount of support that there was in the community. And the honks of support, the people who came up to us to show their support, ended up outnumbering those who, voiced otherwise, about 4 to 1. And the reason I share that is I think it's important for us to rally here in Newark, and also at the same time rally out in the sleepy suburbs. And because the suburbs aren't asleep, that's what this showed me, that resistance to Trump, and more broadly resistance to war, is alive and well. And we just got to keep growing the movement. And for those of you who are interested and able, if in the future, in joining in with Brandywine, what I'll do is I'll post the information on our group, our coalition's Facebook page. But Brandywine does the monthly drone protest. They also have a monthly opportunity for civil disobedience outside King of Prussia's Lockheed Martin facility. Lockheed Martin, of course, being the largest war profiteer in the country. Monthly opportunity for civil disobedience. So anyway, I'll just wrap up here. Thank you for giving me a minute just to share what's going on across the river in Pennsylvania, and if we can get resistance to war in the cities in New Jersey, resistance to war and militarism in the suburbs in Pennsylvania, and the movement is growing, so I'm happy to report that, and just thank you for this quick opportunity.
Thank you, Terry. And of course we know that drones have never, they don't fly over places where the United States has declared war. In fact, the United States hasn't declared war since World War II, so we are engaged in a lot of these activities without authorization. But there are two more speakers to come before we do the reading. First is Bob. It's Bob Botanic to talk about what's going on at Rutgers with CIA involvement and so on, and then after him, T.J. Whitaker to talk about the next month's vigil, and then we'll organize ourselves for the reading.
Okay, Madeline, you're doing a great job. Everything's great. Keep telling Madeline that. Okay, so I'm going to be real fast because we want to get on with what everyone really came here today was to see the folks read the Beyond Vietnam speech. I'm back to Rutgers again. I graduated Rutgers 1982, and now I'm going back to Rutgers to work with the Rutgers community to kick the CIA off the Rutgers campus, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, ICE, DHS, all of them. They got a $2 million war grant to bring war to New Jersey. Our Maine State College got a $2 million intelligence center for academic excellence. And they are recruiting spies. They are taking kids on field trips and paying them stipends to do operations in the field. This is really happening. FBI, CIA, and NSA are paying stipends to students at Rutgers to do the dirty work. And we got a university that's supposed to be a haven for students from all over the world to come and study. So what about the students from around the world when the CIA is actively involved in killing their people? What about when they come to Rutgers and they got the CIA that's working with the death squads back home, looking over their shoulders and reading their emails and their Facebook accounts? That's what's going on at Rutgers. And that's why we got to drive the DIA and the CIA from the campus. There was a strong protest of 30 students last Tuesday because the Defense Intelligence Agency was participating in a forum ostensibly on fighting hate while preserving freedom, but the main CIA station chief at Rutgers, John Cohen, was sitting at the table and provided the backdrop with the chief counsel of Rutgers also. That's the top lawyer of Rutgers. And they were talking about best practices, so they're talking about limiting free speech under the auspices of fighting hate and monitoring the analytics of the behavior of the student body. And the intelligence agencies are right in the middle of all this. So that's what's happening, and they're promoting it to the rest of the universities around the country. Rutgers got this and competed with all these other universities. They got the grant, but this is the model of the national security state to take over the universities, to turn them into weapons of war. And we're going to say no to it. We're going to kick that CIA, DIA, NSA, FBI, DHS, and ICE off the Rutgers campus. That's going to happen. Okay, and the next month, I am very excited about what we're going to be doing here next month. Connecting with T.J. Whitaker, who I've known since, the 90s or 80s, something like that. We've been working together on and off. His son, Tahir, is going to be working with us. His son is a student at Arts High School, 2 blocks away. And so he's going to be the master of ceremonies next month. And it's going to be a youth-oriented event. All us old heads, we come, but we sit back and watch, and they're going to run the show. And it's going to be not just speeches, it's going to be entertainment, hopefully, music performance, spoken word, visual. And we're going to have an overdrive campaign to get the word out, not only to the youth of Newark, but to the youth as far and wide as we can. So this will be a MLK Jam site on Saturday, May 5th, and I want to bring up TJ to say a few words about this and whatever else he wants to talk about. I would not put words in TJ's mouth.
Thanks, Bob. All power to the people. All power to the people.
Power to the people.
So yeah, Bob asked me to talk a bit about next month, and I definitely want to do that, but I have to just take a minute, comrades. I come with a very heavy heart this morning. I can't lie about that. I come with a very heavy heart. The last few days, many of you probably have heard the release of former Black Panther Herman Bell was scheduled for April 17th. And a couple of days ago, that release was blocked by a judge in New York. And there will be a hearing on April 13th, this coming April 13th, to determine whether a man who resisted war at home decades ago, 4 or 5 decades ago, who has served 44 years in prison as a victim of the COINTELPRO, 44 years, and his parole is denied. And so we in the community that does work around political prisoners, again, those who fought the war at home, have a heavy heart. And so we ask that you, again, meditate with us and that you come out and support in the coming days. As we talk about our youth and the war abroad, quite often it is the economic draft, right, that pulls them into the military. We know that the military is not their first option. Quite often it is college or whatever business that they want to do, or as artists, they aspire to create. But quite often, again, it's the economic draft that pulls them into the military. I'm proud that next month my son is going to be part of the organizing committee for the youth that are going to be here on May 5th. I'm committed to supporting the youth in Newark and beyond that come. I'm going to reach out to my comrades who are teaching in Newark, because the Newark teachers should be a part of this effort as well. They are in the classroom with the students every day. So again, we have a couple of events that Bob has planned leading up, some events to pull the kids in, some pizza parties and organizing events, so that hopefully by the time we get to next month, on May 5th, that we have a live actual jam session going on to end the wars abroad. All right, thank you for your time, and hope to see you next month.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. See, this movement is building, isn't it? We're bringing more and more people into it and making more and more noise, right? Okay, so just before we start the reading of the Beyond Vietnam War speech, let me just make a brief reference to one other thing, which is Tax Day, coming up on April 17th. And all of what we've been talking about today feeds right into Tax Day, of course, because more than 50% of the money that the Congress decides how to spend gets spent on the military. And it's not even, that doesn't even include the supplements that are being given yearly to wage these wars. So when you go and pay your taxes, if you pay your taxes, there may be some more resistors here. Just think about where all that money is going. And sometimes we have people at post offices that day with flyers and a penny poll to see where people really want to see that money spent. And that money, the people want that money spent on education. Instead of 6% on education and 55% on war, it should be the opposite, right? We need to get our priorities straight. And so reading Dr. King's speech now will help us to understand and see where our priorities went wrong, what someone very wise and very much a leader, where he thought the nation was headed back in 1967, exactly 1 year to the day before he was assassinated, which has got to get us all thinking and scratching our heads. It wasn't only about war, that he went from fighting for civil rights to fighting against war to waging a poor people's campaign. And the combination of those three things was enough to put him right in the crosshairs of the people that run this government and did not want to see that kind of organized change. So, who here is going to be reading? About what? About the 15th? Very quickly, please.
People, I just forgot to tell you that Poor People's Campaign and our work have merged together on April 15. They are going to be present there. They're going to have speakers, and they're going to have their troops there.
You mean they're peaceful troops? They're peaceful troops there. Okay. All right. So, yes. So we're trying, not only trying, succeeding and getting these movements to merge together. So who here is scheduled to read? All right, so I think we need to line up, I think, or form a semicircle here so that everyone is next to one another, and we can pass the mic, and we can see. It's between you and Larry. You want Larry to start? Right. Well, hold on. We have to get everybody there. So who? If you're reading, Lynn, are you reading? Yes. Everybody who's reading, we need to. Justin, here, because I need to know. Justin, okay, you got Larry to start, and then Don is in here. Jessica, let's know. Not here. Okay, Lynn, will you go where? I have Jessica. Where's Jessica? Jessica. Okay, did you go next to the third one? Popcorn kids, line yourself up to it. Let's see. I need the popcorn kids who is Davey at page 5. He's in back of you. Okay, and then Nikki. Where's Nikki? Here. Okay. And then where's TJ? TJ Whitaker, you're next. Okay. Sean is after you. Okay. Jeff Hoey is next. After Sean at the end there. Pat Augustine is next. I don't see Laura Jenna. Do I have somebody? Jesse, you're the third in line here. 1, 2, 3. You gotta get him.
Wait, Bob.
Then
could you give page 5 to Jesse? Because he's gonna try to read off his mom.
Valentina's after. We need to just keep going in order, in a circle, so in case you don't, or semicircle.
You're going to give everyone the pages, right?
No, unless you, I will if you don't have
it. We need page 5.
Okay, just let me get everybody set up first. Okay? And then Valentina, and then another popcorn kid. He was reading page 14. He's reading page 14.
2 girls, they're here.
Can they join the...
They're here. They're right there.
When they come in after next to Valentina. Because she's reading page 13.
Okay.
So we're going to... and Diane? Diane Moxley.
I'm 17, right? I'm 15.
Oh, okay, Diane, so you're here. 15, Diane. There's 2 Dianes, sorry. And then another popcorn kid who's reading page...
That's her sister.
16. Who's ever reading 16?
Okay, Tiffany, she's gonna read 16. Okay, so we'll get
somebody right in between the 2 Dianes. Okay, and then we need pages 18 and 19. Popcorn kids.
Yes, 16 is right here.
16.
Yes,
How about
Sharon,
18 and 19? Do we have
Sharon
16
is
here?
over here holding the sign.
Okay, so can somebody else hold the sign?
16 is here.
Oh, are you?
And the purple jacket.
Oh, you're 16? Okay.
16, 17, 18.
I'm 17.
Where's 19? Where's 19?
Holding the sign.
Okay, we need 19. And Sarah, you're 20.
Yes.
All right, so let me get pages.
How you doing, man?
I need somebody for page 2. Anyone Anybody want to volunteer? Okay, I have the page here for you. Page 2, you're welcome. Between Larry and Jesse. Alright, and then I need 3.
Yeah, that's right. And there's no rain. Yeah.
So you're 3.
So he's 5.
Who's 4? Who's 4? You gonna do it? Okay. I'll give you 4. It's gonna take me a minute or 2. I'll come back. Fine, here's 4. But please stop. Okay, that's on page 4. You were working on it together, so it should fall. Fine. 6.
Could we begin number 1? Bob? When it says matter.
Don't worry, we're almost there.
Okay.
While Madeline is getting us organized, just let me say how glad I am that everyone came out today for this reading. This was the right thing to do. And I firmly believe that the redemption of America, at least in part, depends on the preservation of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. He is one of the few figures in contemporary American history on which there is a wide consensus that the work he was doing was right. And he embodied those things that we stand for and that we have been fighting for. So I'm so glad that the coalition had this today, and I'm glad all of you came out. Dr. King gave this speech on April 4th, 1967 at the Riverside Church in New York. Now, I'm going to tell you a little something. A lot of people think this was Dr. King's first speech on Vietnam. It was not actually his first. It was the speech that was most publicized. At the end of 1966, he began to talk about Vietnam. And some of you might know it and some of you might not. But in large part, Dr. King was pushed to make this speech by his wife, Coretta Scott King. Many people don't know the history of Coretta Scott King as an activist. And some of their love letters have been released before they got married. And you can see her deep commitment toward the values that we hold dear today. And to my surprise, even as early as 1953, they were talking about a total change in the United States of America. April 4th, 1967, Dr. King gave this speech, and on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated. And I believe that in large part he was assassinated, one, because of his stance on the war in Vietnam, and two, because he was determined to bring the capitalist system into his moral radar and began to call for a radical, these are his words. He said there must be a radical transformation of power and wealth, a radical redistribution of wealth, of power and wealth in America, and that there must be a radical transformation of our socioeconomic system. You can read this in Dr. King's 5th book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? I believe it's mentioned in the chapter titled The World House. So Dr. King gave this speech, and then a year later to the day, he was assassinated. And he gave this speech April 4th, 1967. And then in Newark, New Jersey, he was here March 27th, 1968. But April 4th, 1967, he gives this speech, and in July 1967, there's a tremendous uprising in America. And one of those uprisings, one of those rebellions took place in Newark, New Jersey. In the fall of 1967, I was a student at that school right up the street, not the one with the bridge, but the one beyond it, Arts High School. Now, as an 8th grader, I had gotten thrown out of school for being very bad. What I did then, I probably would have been arrested for. So when I got to Arts High, I was trying to turn over a new leaf. The first week, we had freshman orientation. I'm sitting toward the front in the middle. And in the freshman orientation, the teachers speak, administrators speak, and they let the student council president speak. And the principal introduced the student council president, whose name was David. And he was white, because at that time, Arts High was pretty integrated. Maybe 50-50, maybe 40-60, something like that. Young white fellow. So the principal says, David, I want you to talk about the student council, the Halloween party, and the UNICEF collection. Some of these young people don't know UNICEF, but we used to take penny collections in school to help poor people abroad. David comes up to the podium and he starts to speak. But he doesn't talk about that. He starts talking about the war in Vietnam. Now, I'm a freshman. I didn't know a damn thing about Vietnam. Excuse me, children. I didn't know a thing about Vietnam. And I'm sitting there, and he starts to talk about the war in Vietnam, and the principal stands up and interrupts him and says, David, don't speak about the war in Vietnam. Speak about what I told you to speak about. David keeps talking about the war in Vietnam. The principal walks over to David and tried to drag him from the podium, and David and the principal get into a fight the first week of school, and I'm sitting there with my mouth open. Now, I didn't know anything about Vietnam, but I said that I knew this much. I knew that when people felt passionately about something, because I grew up in the hood, we always speak passionately, and we fight and everything else. I knew it must have been important, and that made me want to be in the student government. David didn't graduate from Arts High. He got thrown out of school. But David was right. The principal and those in authority were wrong. And I want to tell the young people here today that Dr. King is remembered not because of the things he said that people liked, but because he took a stand for right when it was not popular to take a stand for right. You know what I mean. When your friends want to do something bad and you don't want to do it, you're taking a stand for right. At the end of his life, Dr. King was one of the most unpopular people in the United States of America. So with that, yes.
I just want to make sure that all parts are covered. So I apologize for the interruption. Page 1. If you have page 1, raise your hand. Page 1, you have it. Page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We got them all. I was going to give signals, but I don't think I am. I think you're all set. Just pay attention to what's being read in front of you, and then as soon as they're finished, you jump right in. Thank you, Larry.
And I just want to apologize to the people who are reading. I'm going to have to leave because Nina Turner from Our Revolution is speaking at Rutgers today at 1 o'clock, and I'm also on this program. So I'm not leaving because I don't want to be with you. I'm leaving because I have to be there.
Okay, so which one comes in? All right. I'm sorry.
I need a selfie with you before you go, Larry.
All right. All right. I want to say more, but I'm going to start reading. This page that you have, the speech is title on this page is Beyond Vietnam. But that is not the title of the speech. The title of the speech is A Time to Break the Silence. You can find that speech under that title in a book called A Testament of Hope, edited by Dr. James Washington. And Dr. King titled it that. The title is important. The real title is important because Dr. King was making an admission that he had been silent on an issue, a moral issue, which required him as a pastor in the spirit of Jeremiah and Elijah and Elisha to speak truth to power. And he was silent on this issue because he essentially had made a political agreement that he would stay away from Vietnam so that the civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act of '64, could get through Congress. So it's important to remember the original title of the speech, A Time to Break the Silence. Here we go. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here tonight, and how very delighted I am to see you expressing your concern about the issues that will be discussed tonight by turning out in such large numbers. I also want to say that I consider it a great honor to share this program with Dr. Bennett, Dr. Commager, and Rabbi Heschel, some of the most distinguished leaders and personalities of our nation. And of course, it's always good to come back to Riverside Church. Over the last 8 years, I have had the privilege of preaching here almost every year in that period. And it is always a rich and rewarding experience to come to this great church and this great pulpit. I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join you in this meeting because I am in deepest agreement with the aims of the work of the organization that brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. The recent statements of your executive committee are the sentiments of my own heart, and I found myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in a time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty, but we must move on.
Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. And we must rejoice as well. For surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movement and pray that our inner being may be sensitive to its guidance. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems to close around us. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people, they ask? And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I am nevertheless greatly saddened, for such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest they do not know the world in which they live. In the light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it of signal importance to state clearly, and I trust concisely, why I believe that the path from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the church in Montgomery, Alabama, where I began my pastorate, leads clearly to this sanctuary tonight.
I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to the Hanoi or to the National Liberation Front. It is not addressed to China or to Russia. Nor is it an attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation and the need for a collective solution to the tragedy of Vietnam. Neither is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or the National Liberation Front paragons of virtue, nor to overlook the role they must play in the successful resolution of the problem. While they both may have justifiable reasons to be suspicious of the good faith of the United States, life and history give eloquent testimony to the fact that conflicts are never resolved without trustful give and take on both sides. Tonight, however, I wish not to speak with Hanoi and the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans. Since I am a preacher by calling, I suppose it is not surprising that I have 7 major reasons for bringing Vietnam into the field of my moral vision. There is at the outset a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the build-up in Vietnam. And I watched this program broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything on a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such.
Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinary proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watched them in brutal solidarity burning the huts of a poor village, but we realized that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of cruel manipulation of the poor. My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experience in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years, especially the last 3 summers. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles could not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them the deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that the social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent.
For those who ask the question, aren't you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement of peace I have. This further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto to save the soul of America. We were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for Black people, but instead affirmed the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles that they still were. In a way, we were agreeing with Langston Hughes that Black Ballad of Harlan, who had written earlier, "Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America with me will be." Now it should be incandescently clear to know that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of men to amend the world over. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land, as if the weight of such a commitment to the life and health of America were not enough. Another burden of responsibility was placed upon me in 1964, and I cannot forget that the Nobel Peace Prize was also a commission to work harder than I had ever worked before for the brotherhood of man. This is a calling that takes me beyond national allegiance.
Thank you, Jessica. Good job.
But even if we're not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me why I am speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for their children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong, or to Castro, or to Mao, as faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life? Finally, as I try to explain for you and for myself the road that leads from Montgomery to this place, I would have offered all that was most valid if I simply said that I must be true to my conviction that I share with all men the calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of the race or nation or creed is this vocation of sonship and brotherhood, because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless outcast children. I come tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism, and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers. And as I ponder the madness of Vietnam and search within myself for ways to understand and respond in compassion, my mind goes constantly to the people of the peninsula. I speak now not of the soldiers of each side, not of the ideologies of the Liberation Front, not of the junta in Saigon, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war for almost 3 continuous decades now. I think of them too because it is clear to me that there will be no meaningful solution there until some attempt is made to know them and hear their broken cries.
They must see Americans as strange liberators. The Vietnamese people proclaimed their own independence in 1945 after a combined French and Japanese occupation and before the Communist Revolution in China. They were led by Ho Chi Minh. Even though they quoted the American Declaration of Independence in their own document of freedom, we refused to recognize them. Instead, we decided to support France in its reconquest of her former colony. Our government felt then that the Vietnamese people were not ready for independence, and we again fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long. With that tragic decision, we rejected a revolutionary government seeking self-determination and a government that had been established not by China, for whom Vietnamese have no great love, but by clearly indigenous forces that included some communists. For the peasants, this new government meant real land reform, one of the most important needs in their lives. For 9 years following 1945, we denied the people of Vietnam the right of independence. For 9 years, we vigorously supported the French in their abortive effort to recolonize Vietnam. Before the end of the war, we were meeting 80% of the French war costs. Even before the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu, they began to despair of their reckless action, but we did not. We encouraged them with our huge financial and military supplies to continue the war even after they had lost the will. Soon, we would be paying almost the full cost of this tragic attempt at recolonization.
After the French were defeated, it looked as if independence and land reform would come again through the Geneva Agreement. But instead, there came the United States, determined that Ho should not unify the temporarily divided nation, and the peasants watched, and again as we supported one of the most vicious modern dictators, our chosen man, Premier Diem. The peasants watched and cringed as Diem ruthlessly rooted out all opposition, supported their extortionist landlords, and refused to even discuss reunification with the North. The peasants watched as all of this was presided over by United States influence and then by increasing numbers of United States troops who came in to help quell the insurgency that Diem's methods had aroused. When Diem was overthrown, they may have been happy, but the long line of military dictators seemed to offer no real change, especially in terms of their need for land and peace. The only change came from America as we increased our troop commitments in support of governments which were singularly corrupt, inept, and without popular support. All while the people read our leaflets and received the regular promises of peace and democracy and land reform. Now they languish under our bombs and consider us not their fellow Vietnamese, the real enemy. They move sadly and apathetically as we herd them off the land of their fathers into concentration camps where minimal social needs are rarely met. They know they must move on or be destroyed by our bombs. So they go, primarily women and children and the aged. They watch as we poison their water, as we kill 1 million acres of their crops. They must weep as the bulldozers roar through their areas, preparing to destroy the precious trees. They wander into the hospitals with at least 20 casualties from the American firepower for one Viet Cong inflicted injury. So far, we may have killed a million of them, mostly children. They wander into the towns and see thousands of children homeless without clothes running in packs on the streets like animals. They see children deranged by our soldiers as they beg for food. They see the children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers.
What do the peasants think as we ally ourselves with the landlords and as we refuse to put any action into our many words concerning land reform? What do they think as we test our latest weapons on them, just as the Germans tested out new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe? Where are the roots of the independent Vietnam we claim to be building? Is it among these voiceless ones? We have destroyed their two most cherished institutions, the family and the village. We have destroyed their land and their crops. We have cooperated in the crushing of the nation's only non-communist revolutionary political force, the Unified Buddhist Church. We have supported the enemies of the peasants of Saigon. We have corrupted their women and children and killed their men. Now there is little left to build on, save bitterness. Soon the only solid physical foundations remaining will be found at our military bases and in the concrete of the concentration camps we call fortified hamlets. The peasants may well wonder if we plan to build our new Vietnam on such grounds as these. Could we blame them for such thoughts? We must speak for them and raise the questions they cannot raise. These too are our brothers. Perhaps a more difficult but no less necessary task is to speak for those who have been designated as our enemies. What of the National Liberation Front, that strangely anonymous group we call VC or communists? What must they think of the United States of America when they realize that we permitted the repression and cruelty of Diem, which helped to bring them into being as a resistance group in the South? What do they think of our condoning the violence which led to their own taking up of arms? How can they believe in our integrity when now we speak of aggression from the North as if there was nothing more essential to the war?
How can they trust us when now we charge them with violence after the murderous reign of Diem, and charge them with violence while we pour every new weapon of death into their land? Surely we must understand their feelings, even if we do not condone their actions. Surely we must see that the men we supported pressed them to their violence. Surely we must see that our own computerized plans of destruction simply dwarf their greatest acts. How do they judge us when our officials know that their membership is less than 25% communist and yet insist on giving them the blanket name? What must they be thinking when they know that we are aware of their control of major sections of Vietnam, and yet we appear ready to allow national elections in which this highly organized political parallel government will not have a part? They ask how we can speak of free elections when the Saigon press is censored and controlled by the military junta, and they are surely right to wonder what kind of new government we plan to help form without them, the only real party in touch with the peasants. They question our political goals, and they deny the reality of a peace settlement from which they will be excluded. Their questions are frighteningly relevant. Is our nation planning to build on political myth again and then shore it up upon the power of a new violence? Here is the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence, when it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves. For from his view, we may indeed see the basic weaknesses of our own condition, and if we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who are called the opposition.
So too with Hanoi. In the north, where our bombs now pummel the land and our mines endanger the waterways, we are met by a deep but understandable mistrust. To speak for them is to explain this lack of confidence in Western worlds, and especially their distrust of American intentions now. In Hanoi are the men who led this nation to independence against the Japanese and the French, the men who sought membership in the French Commonwealth and were betrayed by the weakness of Paris and the willfulness of the colonial armies. It was they who led a second struggle against French domination at tremendous costs, and then were persuaded to give up the land they controlled between the 13th and 17th parallel as a temporary measure at Geneva. After 1954, they watched us conspire with Diem to prevent elections, which could have surely brought Ho Chi Minh to power over a unified Vietnam. And they realized they had been betrayed again. When we ask why they do not leap to negotiate, these things must be considered. Also, it must be clear that the leaders of Hanoi considered the presence of American troops in support of the Diem regime to have been the initial military breach of the Geneva Agreement concerning foreign troops. They remind us that they did not begin to send troops in large numbers and even supplies into the south until American forces had moved into the tens of thousands. Hanoi remembers how our leaders refused to tell us the truth about the earlier North Vietnamese overtures for peace, how the president claimed that none existed when they had clearly been made. Ho Chi Minh has watched as America has spoken of peace and built up its forces, and now he has surely heard the increasing international rumors of American plans for an invasion of the North. He knows the bombing and shelling and mining we are doing are part of the traditional pre-invasion strategy. Perhaps only his sense of humor and irony can save him when he hears the most powerful nation in the world speaking of aggression as it drops thousands of bombs on a poor, weak nation more than 800, or rather 8,000, miles away from its shores. At this point, I should make it clear that while I have tried to give a voice to the voiceless in Vietnam and to understand the arguments of those who were called enemy, I am as deeply concerned about our own troops there as anything else. For it occurs to me that what we are submitting them to in Vietnam is not simply the brutalizing process that goes on in any war where armies face each other and seek to destroy. We are adding cynicism to the process of death, for they must know after a short period there that none of the things we claim to be fighting for are really involved. Before long, they must know that their government has sent them into a struggle among Vietnamese, and the more sophisticated surely realize that we are on the side of the wealthy and the secure, while we create a hell for the poor. Surely this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor in America who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and dealt death and corruption in Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as one who loves America, to the leaders of our own nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours. This is the message of the great Buddhist leaders of Vietnam. Recently, one of them wrote these words, and I quote, "Each day the war goes on, the hatred increased in the hearts of the Vietnamese and in the hearts of those of humanitarian instinct. The Americans are forcing even their friends into becoming their enemies. It is curious that the Americans, who calculate so carefully on the possibilities of military victory, do not realize that in the process they are incurring deep psychological and political defeat. The image of America will never again be the image of revolution, freedom, and democracy, but the image of violence and militarism." Unquote.
If we continue, there will be no doubt in my mind and in the mind of the world that we have no honorable intentions in Vietnam. If we do not stop the war against the people of Vietnam immediately, the world will be left with no other alternative than to see this day as some horrible, clumsy, and deadly game we have decided to play. The world now demands a maturity of America, and that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways in order to atone for our sins and errors in Vietnam. We must take initiative in bringing a halt to this tragic war. I would like to suggest 5 concrete things that our government should do to begin the long and difficult process of extricating ourselves from this nightmarish conflict. Number 1, end all bombing in North and South Vietnam. Number 2, declare a unilateral ceasefire in the hope that such action will create the atmosphere for negotiation. 3, take immediate steps to prevent other battlegrounds in Southeast Asia by curtailing our military buildup in Thailand and our interference in Laos. 4, realistically accept the fact that the National Liberation Front has substantially support in South Vietnam and must thereby play a role in any meaningful negotiations in any future Vietnam government. 5, set a date that we will remove all foreign troops from Vietnam in accordance with the 1954 Geneva Agreement.
Part of our ongoing commitment might well express itself in an offer to great asylum to the Vietnamese who fears for his life under a new regime which included the Liberation Front. Then we must make what reparations we can for the damage we have done. We must provide the medical aid that is badly needed, making it available in his country if necessary. Meanwhile, we in the churches and synagogues have a continuous task while we urge our government to disengage itself from a disgraceful commitment. We must continue to raise our voices in our lives if our nation persists in its perverse ways in Vietnam. We must be prepared to match actions with words by seeking out every creative method of protest possible. As we counsel young men concerning military service, we must clarify for them our nation's role in Vietnam and challenge them with all alternative of conscientious objection. I am pleased to say that this is a path now chosen by more than 70 students at my own alma mater, Morehouse College, and I recommitted it to all who find the American course in Vietnam an dishonorable and unjust one. Moreover, I would encourage all ministers of draft aids to give up their ministerial exemptions and seek status as conscientious objections. These are the times for real choices and not false ones. We are at the moment when our lives must be placed on the line if our nation is to survive its own folly. Every man of human conventions must decide on the protest that best suits his conventions. But we must all protest. Now there is something seductively tempting about stopping there and sending us all off and on what in some circles have become a popular crusade against the war in Vietnam. I say we must enter that struggle but I wish to go on now to say something even more disturbing.
Good job. Yeah, thank you.
The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit, and if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergy and layman-concerned committees for the next generation. They will be concerned about Guatemala and Peru. They will be concerned about Thailand and Cambodia. They will be concerned about Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names and attending rallies without end unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy. Such thoughts take us beyond Vietnam, but not beyond our calling as sons of the living God. In 1957, a sensitive American official overseas said that it seemed to him that our nation was on the wrong side of a world revolution. During the past 10 years, we have seen emerge a pattern of suppression which has now justified the presence of U.S. military advisors in Venezuela. This need to maintain social stability for our investments accounts for the counter-revolutionary action of American forces in Guatemala. It tells why American helicopters are being used against guerrillas in Cambodia and why American napalm and Green Beret forces have already been active against rebels in Peru. It is with such activity that the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly, by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. I am convinced that if we are to get onto the right side of world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered.
A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present politics. On the one hand, we are called to play a good Samaritan of life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole judicial role must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteousness ignition, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists in West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries, and say this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the country, with the landed gentry of South America, and say this is not just. The Western arrogance of feeling that it
has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them. It's not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war. This way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings will napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the dark veins of people's normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and physically deranged cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than more programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
Good job.
America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can lead the way in this revolution of values. This is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. There is nothing to keep us from molding a recalcitrant status quo with bruised hands until we have fashioned it into a brotherhood. This kind of positive revolution of values is our best defense against communism. War is not the answer. Communism will never be defeated by the use of atomic bombs or nuclear weapons. Let us not join those who shout war and through their misguided passions urge the United States to relinquish its participation in the United Nations. These are days which demand wise restraint and calm reasonableness. We must not engage in a negative anti-communism, but rather in a positive thrust for democracy, realizing that our greatest defense against communism is to take offensive action in behalf of justice. We must, with positive action, seek to remove those conditions of poverty, insecurity, and injustice, which are the fertile soil in which the seeds of communism grows and develops. These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression, and out of the wounds of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions.
It is a sad fact that because of comfort, complacency, a morbid fear of communism, and our proneness to adjust to injustice, the Western nations that initiated so much of the revolutionary spirit of the modern world have now become the arch anti-revolutionaries. This has driven many to feel that only Marxism has a revolutionary spirit. Therefore, communism is a judgment against our failure to make democracy real and follow through on the revolutions that we initiated. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism. With this powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo and unjust mores, and thereby speed the day when every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and every hill shall be made low. The crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. A genuine revolution of values means, in the final analysis, that our loyalties must become communicable. I may be saying that wrong, but anyway, rather than sectional. Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for mankind. This often misunderstood, this often misinterpreted concept of so readily dismissed by the Nietzsches of the world as a weak and cowardly force has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm not speaking of the force which is just emotional. I am speaking of the force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first episode of St. John's. Let us love one another, for love is God, and everyone that loveth is born of God, and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth of God, for God is love. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfect in us. Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by
the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued this self-defeating path of hate. As Arnold Toynbee says, love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory must be the hope that love is going to have the last word. We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at flood. It ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is adamant to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. Omar Khayyam is right. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. We still have a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders on our doors. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight.
Now, let us begin. Now, let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter, but beautiful struggle for a new world. This is the calling of the sons of God, and our brothers wait eagerly for our response. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we tell them the struggle is too hard? Will our message be that the forces of American life militate against their arrival as full men, and we send our deepest regrets? Or will there be another message of longing, of hope, of solidarity with their yearnings, of commitment to their cause, whatever the cost? The choice is ours. And though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this crucial moment of human history. As that noble bard of yesterday, James Russell Lowell, eloquently stated, "Once to every man and nation comes a moment to decide in the strife of truth and falsehood, for the good or evil side, some great cause, God's new Messiah, offering each the bloom or blight. And the choice goes by forever, twixt that darkness and that light. Though that cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Through her portions be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. And if we only make the right choice, we will be able to transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative song of peace. If we will make the right choice, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our world into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. If we will but make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Speechless, right? Nothing left. Thank you to everyone who read. If we can, if everybody who read or spoke, can we gather behind the statue or in front of the statue here so we can get a group photograph? And while you're gathering, I have a couple of announcements to make. You can bring the banner, David, and sorry, I don't know your name. Mike, you can bring the banner to the front. Come on. Everybody else can come in and somebody wanted, there's a New Jersey Peace Action banner that could get into the photo.